Millionaire finds twin babies in front of his mansion, and 2 weeks later was shocked. The rain lashed against the windows of Jack Thompson's imposing mansion. The multi-millionaire magnate absently watched the drops sliding down the glass, his mind reviewing the latest acquisitions of his business, empire. At 45, Jack had built a true empire from scratch, based solely on rational and strategic decisions. Control was his mantra, and emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. The doorbell of the main entrance echoed in the stillness of the night, pulling Jack out of his musings. He frowned, puzzled. He wasn't expecting visitors at this hour, much less with such weather. With firm steps, he headed towards the entrance, prepared to face any eventuality. As he opened the door, the icy wind and rain hit him in the face, but that wasn't what took his breath away. There, on the threshold of his mansion, lay a Moses basket covered by a soaked blanket. Jack stood paralyzed for a moment, unable to process what his eyes were seeing. With trembling hands, he pulled back the blanket, revealing 2 small, sleeping faces. 2 babies, identical as 2 peas in a pod, rested peacefully, oblivious to the storm raging around them. Jack felt the world stop for a moment. Who could have left these children at his door? And why? Without thinking twice, he took the basket and brought it into the house, closing the door behind him. The babies stirred restlessly but didn't wake up. Jack observed them, feeling a mixture of confusion and something else he couldn't identify. Compassion? Tenderness? Emotions he had long buried deep within himself. "What am I going to do with you?" he murmured, more to himself than to the small sleepers. At that moment, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Sarah Reynolds, his personal assistant. "Mr. Thompson, I hope I'm not bothering you at this hour. I wanted to confirm tomorrow's meeting with the Chinese investors. Do you need me to prepare anything additional?" Jack looked at the screen and then at the babies. His orderly and controlled world had just been shaken to its foundations. With trembling fingers, he replied, "Sarah, I need you to come to the mansion. Now it's an emergency." As he waited for his assistant to arrive, Jack couldn't help but let his mind wander to the past, to another child, alone and scared, abandoned on the steps of an orphanage, to the promise he made to himself to never depend on anyone, to never allow emotions to cloud his judgment. And now these 2 small defenseless beings threatened to tear down all the barriers he had built over the years. The doorbell rang again, pulling Jack out of his memories. Sarah had arrived. As he opened the door, the expression of surprise on his assistant's face was unmistakable. "Mr. Thompson, what?" she began to say, but stopped when she saw the basket with the babies. "Sarah, I need your help," said Jack, in a voice he didn't recognize as his own. "I don't know what to do." As Sarah entered the mansion, closing her soaked umbrella, Jack realized he was about to embark on the biggest challenge of his life, one for which no business strategy had prepared him. The next morning dawned gray and damp, as if the sky reflected the confusion reigning in Jack Thompson's mind. Sitting in his office with an untouched cup of coffee in front of him, he watched Sarah gently, rocking one of the babies while the other slept peacefully in the basket. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah began in a soft but firm voice, "we have to make a decision. We can't keep these children here indefinitely without a plan." Jack ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of a sleepless night. "I know, Sarah, but what am I supposed to do? I can't just get rid of them." "Nobody has suggested that, sir," Sarah replied, looking at him with a mixture of understanding and determination. "But we have options. We can contact social services, look for an adoption agency." Jack stood up abruptly, moving towards the window. The mention of social services had awakened memories he preferred to keep buried. "No," he said firmly, "I won't send them to a system that—" He stopped, aware that he was about to reveal more than he intended. Sarah looked at him curiously but didn't push. Instead, she approached him with the baby in her arms. "Mr. Thompson, may I be honest with you?" Jack nodded, grateful for his assistant's frankness. "I think these children are here for a reason. Maybe it's time for you to consider a different perspective in your life." Jack looked at the baby Sarah was holding. The little one's eyes opened, looking at him with an innocence that completely disarmed him. Sarah, I don't know how to be a father. My life, my work, there's no room for this. With all due respect, sir, Sarah replied with a smile, I think you're underestimating yourself. I've seen you run an empire. Who says you can't raise 2 children? Jack instinctively extended his arms and Sarah handed him the baby A's. He held him. He felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. All right, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. We'll take care of them temporarily until we find a suitable solution. Sarah nodded, but Jack could see a glimmer of approval in her eyes. Excellent decision, Mr. Thompson. Now, if I may suggest, I think the first thing we need is to buy some essential items. Diapers, formula, clothes. Jack blinked, overwhelmed by the reality of the situation. Of course, take care of that, Sarah, and cancel my meetings for today. I think we have a lot to do. As Sarah left the office to make the necessary arrangements, Jack stood looking at the baby in his arms. For the first time in years, he felt he was losing control of his carefully structured life. And, surprisingly, it didn't bother him as much as he would have expected. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Jack's mansion, once a sanctuary of order and tranquility, was filled with babies crying, midnight bottle feedings, and diaper changes. Jack, accustomed to delegating tasks, found himself learning to do things he had never imagined one night. As he tried to calm one of the twins, Jack caught himself humming a lullaby he thought he had forgotten, a melody his mother used to sing to him before abandoning him. The memory, instead of saddening him, filled him with renewed determination. I won't be like her, he murmured to the baby, who was finally falling asleep in his arms. I won't abandon you. Sarah, who was spending more and more time at the mansion helping with the twins, observed her boss's transformation with a mixture of amazement and pride. The cold and calculating man was giving way to someone more human, more vulnerable. However, as Jack immersed himself more in his role as temporary father, complications began to arise in his business empire. Missed meetings, postponed decisions, competitors taking advantage of his distraction. One afternoon, as Jack was feeding one of the babies, Sarah entered the room with a worried expression. Mr. Thompson, we have a problem. The board of directors is questioning your commitment to the company. There are rumors of a possible vote of no confidence. Jack looked at the baby in his arms and then at Sarah. For the first time in his life, he found himself at a crossroads where the path to follow wasn't clear. Sarah, he finally said, I think it's time to make a definitive decision. These children, I can't simply hand them over. Not now. Sarah smiled, as if she had been waiting for this moment. I understand, sir. What do you want me to do? Prepare a press conference, Jack replied, his voice filled with determination. It's time for the world to meet the heirs of the Thompson Empire. As Sarah left to make the arrangements, Jack looked out the window, aware that he was about to change the course of his life forever. The challenges he would face would be enormous, but for the first time in years he felt he had a purpose beyond the numbers in a bank account. What Jack didn't know was that his decision to adopt the twins would trigger a series of events that would test not only his ability as a father, but also his cunning as a businessman and his strength as a human being. The path ahead was full of unexpected turns, secrets to uncover, and a conspiracy that would threaten everything he had built. But for now, as he held the baby in his arms, Jack Thompson felt for the first time in a long time truly alive. The months flew by for Jack Thompson. The adoption of the twins, whom he had named Ethan and Noah, had become the news of the year in the business world. Many saw it as a masterful public relations move, a way to soften the image of the ruthless magnate. But for Jack, the reality was much more complex and personal. Sunday morning, while playing with the children in the mansion's garden, Jack noticed something strange. Ethan, always the more restless of the two, seemed fascinated with an old pocket watch that Jack kept as a memento of his biological father. The little one was looking at it with unusual intensity for a child his age. You like it, champ? Jack asked, approaching his son. Ethan babbled something unintelligible, and then, to Jack's surprise, clearly pronounced, Grandpa. Jack froze. How could Ethan know that word? And even more, How could he associate it with an object that belonged to a man who had died long before the twins were born? That night, while the children slept, Jack found himself obsessively reviewing the few belongings the twins had arrived with. He was looking for some clue, some connection that would explain Ethan's strange behavior. It was then that he saw it. In the corner of the blanket that covered the Moses basket on that rainy night, embroidered with golden thread, were the initials JT, the same initials as his father, James Thompson. The discovery left Jack breathless. Was it possible that the twins had some connection to his biological family, or was it all an elaborate coincidence? Determined to get to the bottom of the matter, Jack summoned Sarah to an urgent meeting in his office. "I need you to investigate everything you can about the twins' origin," he told her, showing her the initials on the blanket. "There's something here that doesn't add up. Sarah and I have the feeling it's just the tip of the iceberg." Sarah nodded, but Jack noticed a flash of unease in her eyes. "Is something wrong, Sarah?" he asked, intrigued by his assistant's reaction. "No, sir, it's just that—" Sarah hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Are you sure you want to stir this up? Sometimes the past is better left where it is." Sarah's words echoed in Jack's mind. What did she know that he didn't? "Sarah, if you know something, I need you to tell me now," Jack demanded, his voice mixing authority with a touch of pleading. Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. Thompson, there's something I must confess. The night the twins arrived, it wasn't a coincidence that I was available to come so quickly." Jack felt the ground move beneath his feet. "What do you mean?" I knew the children were going to be left at your door. In fact, I helped coordinate everything." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Jack collapsed into his chair, trying to process the information. "Why, Sarah? Why would you do something like that?" Sarah's eyes filled with unshed tears. "Because someone contacted me. Someone who claimed to know your past, Mr. Thompson. Someone who assured that these children are your nephews." Jack felt the world spinning around him. Nephews? But he had no siblings unless— "My father," Jack murmured. "Are you saying my father had other children?" Sarah nodded slowly, her face a mixture of guilt and concern. "According to the information I received, your father, James Thompson, had a relationship years after abandoning your mother. From that relationship, twins were born, a boy and a girl. The daughter is the biological mother of Ethan and Noah." Jack stood up abruptly, unable to contain the storm of emotions that overwhelmed him. He walked to the window, his mind desperately trying to fit the pieces of this unexpected puzzle together. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why orchestrate all this? Why not just tell me?" Sarah approached cautiously, as if fearing Jack's reaction. "The person who contacted me said it was the only way to protect the children, that there was danger, and that only you could keep them safe." Jack turned sharply, his eyes burning with a mixture of pain and determination. "Who, Sarah, who contacted you?" "I don't know, sir. All communications were anonymous, but—" Sarah hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I think it could be related to some of your business rivals." Jack's mind began to work at full speed. Business rivals. What did they have to do with all this? Unless— "My father's empire," Jack murmured, the pieces slowly falling into place. "I always thought I had built it from scratch. But what if there was more? What if there's a part of his legacy that I don't know about?" Sarah nodded slowly. "That would explain why some of your competitors seem so interested in destabilizing you lately. Perhaps they fear that by raising the twins, you'll discover secrets that could threaten their positions." Jack collapsed back into his chair, overwhelmed by the implications of everything he had just discovered. His life, which he thought he had under control, was crumbling before his eyes, and at the center of it all were Ethan and Noah, two innocents caught in a web of secrets and conspiracies. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice regaining some of its usual firmness, "I need you to investigate everything, every detail about my father, about that supposed relationship, about the twins' mother. Leave no stone unturned." "Of course, sir. But what will you do?" Jack looked towards the door that led to the hallway, where he could hear the soft snores of the twins in the adjacent room. "I'm going to protect my family," he replied with determination. "And I'm going to uncover the truth no matter who I have to face in the process." As Sarah withdrew to begin her investigation, Jack was left alone in his office, contemplating how his life had taken such a dramatic turn in such a short time. Just a few months ago, he was a lonely man focused solely on business. Now he was the father of 2 children and was about to embark on a quest that could shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about himself and his family. What Jack didn't know was that, while he began to unravel the mysteries of his past, other forces were moving in the shadows. Rivals who saw in his distraction an opportunity to undermine his empire. And a mysterious figure who watched from afar, waiting for the right moment to make their entrance and reveal even more surprising truths. As the night progressed, Jack found himself reviewing old photographs and documents, looking for clues that might have gone unnoticed for years. In one of the photos, he noticed something that had never caught his attention before. In the background, almost hidden in the shadows, was a female figure whose face bore a striking resemblance to the twins. "Who are you?" Jack murmured, tracing the contour of the mysterious woman with his finger. "Are you the mother of my nephews, my sister?" With each unanswered question, Jack felt he was delving deeper into a labyrinth of family and corporate secrets. But one thing was clear. He wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Jack Thompson. On one hand, he continued with his responsibilities as CEO of his business empire, maintaining a facade of normalcy to the outside world. The other, he devoted every free moment to investigating his family's past and the origin of the twins. With Sarah's tireless help one afternoon, while reviewing some documents in his office, Jack received a call that would chill his blood. "Mr. Thompson," said a distorted voice on the other end of the line, "I hope you're enjoying your role as a father. It would be a shame if something were to happen to those adorable children, wouldn't it?" Jack jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Who I am doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is what you will do. Stop your investigation, Mr. Thompson. Some truths are better left buried." Before Jack could respond, the call was cut off. With trembling hands, he dialed Sarah's number. "Sarah, I need you to come to the office right now, and please make sure the children are safe in the mansion." When Sarah arrived, Jack told her about the threatening call. His assistant's expression changed from shock to determination. "Sir, I think it's time to consider additional security measures," Sarah suggested. "Not just for the children, but for you as well." Jack nodded, his mind working at full speed. "You're right, but this also confirms that we're on to something big, Sarah. Someone is scared enough to resort to threats." As they discussed the measures to take, Jack's phone rang again. This time it was a number he recognized, Alexander Wells, his biggest rival in the business world. "Jack, old friend." Alexander's voice sounded jovial, but Jack could detect a tone of insincerity. "I've heard you've been asking interesting questions lately. Why don't we meet to catch up?" Jack exchanged a look with Sarah before responding. "Of course, Alexander. How about tomorrow at the club?" After hanging up, Sarah expressed her concern. "Mr. Thompson, are you sure it's wise to meet with Wells at this time?" Jack smiled, but it was a smile without joy. "Sometimes, Sarah, the best way to uncover the truth is to confront those trying to hide it directly." The next day, at the exclusive club where the business elite usually gathered, Jack found himself face to face with Alexander Wells. The atmosphere was charged with tension, barely disguised by polite smiles and formal greetings. "Jack, I'm glad you came," said Alexander, indicating for him to take a seat. "I must say your recent change in priorities has been a topic of much discussion in our circles." Jack kept his expression neutral. "Fatherhood has that effect, Alexander. It makes you reconsider many things." Alexander smiled, but his eyes remained cold, including, apparently, old family secrets. Jack, as a friend, I suggest you reconsider the path you're taking. Some doors once opened cannot be closed. Is that a threat, Alexander? Jack asked, his voice low but firm. Not at all, my dear friend, Alexander replied, raising his glass in a false toast. Simply advice from someone who appreciates the current balance of things. As the conversation continued, full of innuendos and veiled threats, Jack realized he was playing a much more dangerous game than he had imagined. Not only was his business empire at stake, but the safety of Ethan and Noah, and possibly the entire legacy of the Thompson family. As he left the club, Jack encountered an unexpected surprise. Waiting for him next to his car was a young woman whose face seemed strangely familiar. "Mr. Thompson," the woman said, her voice trembling but determined. "My name is Emily Parker, and I believe we have a lot to talk about." Jack felt the world stop for a moment. Emily Parker. The name he had been searching for weeks, the biological mother of the twins, his niece. Emily. He finally managed to say, "I think you're right. We have a lot to talk about." As they drove away together, Jack couldn't help but feel he was about to discover truths that would change his life forever. What he didn't know was that those truths would come at an even higher price than he could imagine. The car ride from the club to the Thompson mansion was tense and silent. Jack and Emily, two strangers bound by blood, ties, and secrets, barely exchanged words. Each was immersed in their own thoughts, preparing for the conversation that was about to come once in Jack's private study, away from indiscreet ears. Emily finally broke the silence. "I suppose you have many questions," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jack nodded, trying to maintain his composure. "Why now, Emily? Why leave the children at my door like that?" Emily closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. "I had no choice, Uncle Jack. I am in danger, and the children, they are the key to everything." Jack leaned forward, his curiosity mixed with concern. "What do you mean? What danger?" Emily pulled out a small flash drive from her purse. "This contains information about the illegal activities of some of your business rivals, including Alexander Wells' information that my father, your brother, discovered before." Her voice broke, unable to continue. "Before what, Emily?" Jack gently pressed. "Before they killed him," Emily replied, tears running down her cheeks. "Dad discovered something big, Uncle Jack. Something that could bring down entire empires, and when he threatened to expose it, they silenced him." Jack felt the ground open beneath his feet. His brother, whose existence he hadn't even known about until recently, had been murdered. And now his niece and her children were in danger for the same reason. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" Jack asked, struggling to process all the information. Emily gave a sad smile. "Because I didn't know if I could trust you. I didn't know if you were involved in all of this. Leaving the children with you was a test. I wanted to see how you would react, if you would protect them." Jack stood up, walking towards the window. Outside, he could see Ethan and Noah playing in the garden under the watchful eye of their new nanny. "You did," Emily continued. "You protected them. You loved them. And that gave me hope that maybe, together, we could unmask those responsible and put an end to all of this." Jack turned to look at Emily, his face a mask of determination. "We will," he said firmly. "But first I need to know everything." From the beginning, over the next few hours, Emily told Jack the whole story. How James Thompson, Jack's father, had secretly had another family. How Jack's brother, Michael, had followed in his father's footsteps in business, but had discovered a network of corruption involving some of the most powerful companies in the country. And how, in his attempt to do the right thing, he had paid with his life. The twins, Emily explained, are the living proof of all this. Their DNA could confirm their relationship to you and, by extension, validate all the information my father gathered. Jack processed all the information in silence. His world, which he thought he knew so well, had transformed into a labyrinth of lies and betrayals. "Emily," he finally said, "I promise you I'll do everything in my power to protect you and the children, and together we'll expose the truth regardless of the consequences." As they sealed their pact with an embrace, the first embrace between uncle and niece, Jack couldn't help but feel they were on the edge of a precipice. Emily's revelations had opened a Pandora's box, and now they faced forces much more powerful and dangerous than they had imagined. What Jack didn't know was that, at that very moment, Alexander Wells and his associates were planning their next move. A move that would test not only Jack's determination, but also the family ties he had just discovered. The game had begun, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The days following Emily's revelation were a whirlwind of activity for Jack Thompson, divided between his role as CEO, father, and now protector of an explosive family secret. Jack felt like he was walking a tightrope one morning. While having breakfast with the twins, Sarah burst into the dining room, her face pale with concern. "Mr. Thompson, we have a problem," she said, handing him a tablet. "It's just hit all the media." Jack looked at the screen and felt the ground open beneath his feet. The headline read, "Thompson Empire Under Scrutiny, Investigation for Fraud and Money Laundering." "What the hell is this?" he muttered, frantically scrolling through the news. "It seems someone leaked false information to the press," Sarah explained. "They're accusing the company of illegal practices and," she paused, looking at the children, "they're questioning the adoption of the twins." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, trying to maintain calm in front of Ethan and Noah. "Sarah, take the children to the nanny and then gather the legal team. We need to counterattack." As Sarah took the twins away, Jack called Emily. "Emily, are you seeing the news?" he asked as soon as she answered. "Yes, Uncle," she replied, her voice trembling. "Do you think it was them?" "I'm sure," Jack said. "It's their way of pressuring us, but we're not going to yield." Throughout the day, Jack found himself immersed in a battle on multiple fronts. On one side, his legal team worked tirelessly to deny the accusations and prepare a countersuit for defamation. On the other, Jack had to face a nervous board of directors and investors threatening to withdraw their support. Amidst the chaos, Jack received an unexpected call. It was Alexander Wells. "Jack, old friend," Wells said, his voice brimming with false concern. "What an unfortunate situation, you know. I could help you get out of this mess." "In exchange for what, Alexander?" Jack asked, his voice loaded with distrust. "Oh, nothing complicated. I just need you to hand over certain information that I believe is in your possession, and, of course, for you to stop poking your nose into matters that don't concern you." Jack gripped the phone tightly. "Go to hell, Alexander." "Tsk, tisk, what a pity. I was hoping you'd be more reasonable." "Well, I guess we'll have to do this the hard way." The call cut off, leaving Jack with a feeling of unease. He knew Wells wouldn't stop at anything to obtain the information Emily had inherited from her father. That night, as Jack was reviewing documents in his study, he heard a noise coming from the twins' room. At first, he thought it might be the nanny, but a sixth sense made him run. Thereupon opening the door, he came face to face with a man dressed in black holding. Noah Ethan was crying in his crib. "Not one more step, Mr. Thompson," the intruder warned, "unless you want something to happen to the little one." Jack raised his hands, his mind working at full speed. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep calm. "You already know the information. You have 24 hours to hand it over, or next time we'll take both of them." At that moment, there was a dull thud, and the intruder fell to the ground. Behind him stood Sarah, holding a broken vase. "I think we should call the police, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, taking Noah in her arms. Jack nodded, hugging Ethan and Emily. "It's time for all of us to be together. This is no longer just a business war. It's a war for our family." As the police sirens approached, Jack looked at his children and Sarah. He knew the next 24 hours would be critical. They had to act quickly and decisively if they wanted to end this nightmare once and for all. What Jack didn't know was that the attempted kidnapping was just the beginning. Alexander Wells and his allies were preparing a masterstroke that would threaten not only the Thompson Empire, but the very life of Jack and his newly discovered family. The Thompson mansion had become a fortress. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, windows were reinforced, and state-of-the-art surveillance systems had been installed. In Jack's study, now converted into an improvised operations center, a tense calm prevailed. Jack, Emily, Sarah, and a small group of trusted advisors were gathered around a large table, studying documents and devising strategies. "We have to get ahead of Wells," Jack said, his voice loaded with determination. "We can't keep playing defense," Emily nodded, handing him a folder. "I think I found something. Uncle, among my father's documents, there's evidence of a series of suspicious transactions linked to Wells's shell companies." Jack studied the documents, his eyes shining with a mixture of amazement and fury. "This is big, Emily. With this, we could not only clear our name, but also expose the entire corruption network." Sarah, who had been working on her laptop, intervened. "Mr. Thompson, I just received information from our contact at the district attorney's office. They're willing to listen to us, but they need irrefutable evidence." Jack stood up, walking to the window. He could see Ethan and Noah playing in the garden, protected by 2 bodyguards. The image of his children gave him the strength he needed. "Well, then we'll give them evidence," he said, turning to the group. "But we're going to do it. Big Sarah, contact all major media outlets, Emily. Prepare a dossier with all the information we have. And you," he pointed to one of his legal advisors, "prepare a formal lawsuit against Wells and his associates." "Are you sure about this, Mr. Thompson?" Sarah asked. "It's a risky move." Jack smiled, but it was a humorless smile. "Sometimes, Sarah, the best defense is a good offense. Wells wants war. We'll give him war." During the following hours, the Thompson mansion became a hive of activity. While the team worked tirelessly, Jack received an unexpected call. It was his old mentor, Robert Sullivan, a respected businessman who had retired years ago. "Jack's son." Robert's voice sounded concerned. "I've been following the news. What kind of mess have you gotten yourself into?" Jack sighed, feeling for the first time in days the weight of the situation. "It's complicated, Robert, but I promise you I'm doing the right thing. I believe you, boy, and I want you to know you have my support. In fact, I have information that could be useful to you." The conversation with Robert provided Jack with the final piece of the puzzle. With a triumphant smile, he gathered his team. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have everything we need. It's time to counterattack." The next day, Jack Thompson called a press conference at his company's headquarters. The media crowded, eager to hear from the magnate who had been in the eye of the storm for the past few weeks. With Emily and Sarah by his side, Jack stood before the microphones. His voice was firm and clear when he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've gathered you here today to reveal the truth behind the accusations that have been made against me and my company, but more importantly, to expose a network of corruption that has been operating in the shadows for years." As Jack spoke, giant screens behind him began to display documents, graphs, and photographs that supported each of his claims. The revelations were explosive: bribes, money laundering, intimidation, and even evidence of the conspiracy to murder Jack's brother. "Alexander Wells and his associates," Jack continued, "have tried to silence us, have threatened my family, and have tried to destroy everything we've built. But today, here and now, I tell them, no more." At that moment, the auditorium doors burst open. Alexander Wells, flanked by bodyguards, entered in a fury. "This is slander, Thompson," he shouted. "I'll sue you for defamation." Jack smiled, a smile that made Wells stop in his tracks. "I'm afraid you're too late, Alexander. At this moment, the district attorney's office is issuing arrest warrants for you and your partners, and I understand the police are already on their way." Chaos broke out in the room. Camera flashes, shouts from journalists, and the sound of approaching sirens. In the midst of it all, Jack stood firm, his gaze fixed on Wells. "It's over, Alexander. The truth always comes to light." As the police entered and handcuffed Wells, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Emily with tears in her eyes. "We did it. Uncle Dad would be proud." Jack hugged his niece, feeling for the first time in weeks that they could breathe easy. But he knew this was just the beginning. They had much to rebuild and heal. What Jack didn't know was that, while they celebrated this victory, a new threat was brewing, one that would test not only his business empire, but the very foundations of his newly discovered family. The months following Alexander Wells' downfall were a whirlwind of activity for Jack Thompson and his family. The exposure of the corruption network had shaken the business world to its core, and Jack found himself at the center of a media and legal storm. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in his study, Jack received an unexpected visit. It was Emily with the twins. "Uncle Jack," Emily said, her voice filled with emotion, "the kids want to show you something." Ethan and Noah, now almost 3 years old, approached Jack shyly in their hands. They held a drawing. "What's this, champions?" Jack asked, taking the paper. "It's our family," Ethan replied proudly. Jack looked at the drawing and felt a lump form in his throat. There, drawn with childish strokes, were he, Emily, Sarah, and the twins, all holding hands. "It's beautiful," he managed to say, hugging the children. Emily smiled, but Jack noticed a hint of worry in her eyes. "What's wrong, Emily?" he asked, once the children had gone to play. Emily sighed, sitting across from him. "Uncle, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time for the kids and me to move out. You've done so much for us, but I don't want to keep being a burden." Jack stood up, abruptly, surprised by the suggestion. "Emily, you're not a burden. You're my family, the only family I have." "I know, Uncle, but—" At that moment, Sarah rushed into the study. "Mr. Thompson, Emily, you need to see this," she said, turning on the television. On the screen appeared a middle-aged woman whose face seemed vaguely familiar to them. "My name is Laura Wells," the woman was saying. "I am Alexander Wells's sister, and I'm here to reveal the truth about Jack Thompson and his supposed family." Jack and Emily exchanged looks of surprise and concern. What new threat was this, Laura? Wells continued her speech, launching accusations that mixed half-truths with outright lies. She insinuated that Jack had orchestrated everything, from the abandonment of the twins to Alexander's downfall, in an elaborate plan to take control of the Wells businesses. "This is a disaster," Jack muttered, turning off the television. Just when we thought everything had calmed down, Emily approached her uncle, putting a hand on his shoulder. "We'll face it together, Uncle, as a family." Jack nodded, grateful for the support, but he knew they had a long road ahead. The following days were a frenzy of meetings with lawyers, public relations advisors, and company executives. Laura Wells's appearance had rekindled doubts and speculations, and Jack found himself once again fighting to protect not only his empire, but also his family. One night, as Jack was working late in his study, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Sarah. "Mr. Thompson, do you have a moment?" Jack nodded, indicating for her to enter. He noticed that Sarah seemed nervous, which was unusual for her. "What's going on, Sarah?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "Sir, there's something I must confess, something I've been hiding since the twins came into our lives." Jack tensed, preparing himself for whatever was to come. "I'm listening," Jack said, his voice mixing curiosity and apprehension. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength before continuing. "Mr. Thompson, I knew your brother Michael. In fact, we were very close." Jack leaned forward, surprised by this revelation. "What do you mean by close?" Sarah swallowed hard before responding. "We were in love. Sir Michael and I had a relationship. It was he who asked me to take care of you and your company if anything happened to him." Jack's mind was spinning, so many pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Sarah, I was afraid, sir. Afraid that you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I was involved in all this mess. And then, when the twins arrived—" Sarah paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't help but love them as if they were my own." Jack stood up and walked to the window, trying to process all this new information. After a moment of silence, he turned to Sarah. "Is there anything else I should know?" Sarah nodded, slowly. "Yes, sir. I think I know who the twins' mother really is." At that moment, as if fate had decided to intervene, the study door burst open. Emily entered, her face pale and her hands trembling, holding a paper. "Uncle Jack, Sarah. I just received the results of the DNA tests I secretly had done." Jack and Emily exchanged surprised looks. "What tests?" Jack asked. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "I wanted to be... Sure, Uncle, I wanted to know if I really am who I think I am. With trembling hands, Emily handed the paper to Jack. He read it quickly, his eyes widening in surprise. This can't be," he muttered. Sarah approached, her face a mixture of fear and hope. "What does it say, Mr. Thompson?" Jack looked at the two women in front of him, the two people he trusted most, and felt the world wobble beneath his feet. "According to this," he finally said, "Emily is not my niece, she's my daughter." The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Emily collapsed into a chair, her face a mask of shock and confusion. Sarah, for her part, seemed to be fighting an internal storm. "But that's not all," Jack continued, his voice barely a whisper. The twins are not my nephews, they're my grandchildren." The room seemed to spin around the three of them, so many lies, so many secrets, all coming to light at once. I don't understand," Emily finally managed to say. "How is this possible?" Jack sat heavily in his chair, his mind working at full speed to fit the pieces of this new puzzle together. "Your mother," he finally said, looking at Emily, "must have been someone I had a relationship with many years ago, someone who decided not to tell me about your existence." Sarah stepped forward, her face a mixture of guilt and resolution. "I think I can explain that, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "Emily's mother was my older sister, Jennifer." The revelations seemed endless. Jack and Emily looked at Sarah, waiting for an explanation. "Jennifer worked for your father many years ago, Mr. Thompson," Sarah continued. She told me about your relationship, about Emily, but she made me promise to keep the secret. When Michael discovered the truth, he contacted me. He wanted to protect Emily and the twins." Emily suddenly stood up, her face a mix of emotions. "So, you're my aunt, and you've known all this from the beginning?" Sarah nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Emily, I wanted to tell you, but..." Jack raised a hand, interrupting the conversation. "Wait a moment. If Emily is my daughter, and the twins are her children, who is the father?" The silence that followed this question was heavy, loaded with tension. Emily looked at the floor, unable to face Jack's gaze. "The father," Emily began, her voice barely audible. "The father of the twins is Alexander Wells Jr., Alexander Wells' son." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Jack felt the world crumbling around him. His daughter, his grandchildren, connected in this way to his greatest enemy. "My God," Jack muttered, running a hand over his face. "How did we get to this?" At that moment, as if the universe wanted to add one more twist to this already complicated story, Jack's phone rang. It was an unknown number. With his heart pounding, Jack answered, putting it on speaker. "Hello?" A familiar voice, one he hadn't heard in decades, resonated in the room. "Hello, Jack. It's Jennifer. I think it's time we talk." Jennifer's voice, clear and firm, despite the years that had passed, filled the room. Jack, Emily, and Sarah looked at each other, paralyzed by surprise. "Jennifer," Jack finally managed to say, after all these years. "I know, Jack," Jennifer replied. "I know we have a lot to talk about. Can I assume that Emily and Sarah are with you?" Jack nodded, though he knew Jennifer couldn't see him. "Yes, they're here, and we've just discovered the truth, or at least part of it." A sigh was heard on the other end of the line. "I understand. I guess it's time for you to know the whole story. Can I see you? In person, I mean." Jack looked at Emily and Sarah, seeking their approval. Both nodded slowly. "All right, Jennifer. Where and when?" "Right now, if possible. I'm outside your house, Jack." The revelation took them by surprise. Jack approached the window and indeed saw a car parked in front of the mansion. "Okay," he finally said. "We're waiting for you." Minutes later, Jennifer entered the study. Despite the years, she was still a beautiful woman, with the same dark hair and penetrating eyes that Emily had inherited. "Hello, everyone," she said softly. Her gaze lingering on each of those present, Jack was the first to speak. "Jennifer, I think you owe us an explanation." She nodded, sitting in a chair that Sarah offered her. "You're right, Jack, I owe you all an explanation. Especially you, Emily," she said, looking at her daughter with eyes full of love and remorse. Emily, who had been silent until that moment, spoke with a trembling voice. "Why, Mum? Why did you abandon us? Why all this secrecy? Jennifer closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. It all started more than 30 years ago, she began. I was working for James Thompson, your father, Jack. We were young, we fell in love, but things got complicated. Jack interrupted her. Complicated how? Your father discovered our relationship, Jennifer continued. He didn't approve. He thought I was only interested in the family's money. He threatened to destroy my career if I didn't stay away from you. But that doesn't explain why you left without telling me about Emily, Jack said, his voice mixing pain and frustration. Jennifer nodded. You're right. The truth is that I discovered something. Something about your father's businesses, Jack. Something illegal and dangerous. The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Jack felt the ground move beneath his feet. What did you discover? Your father was involved in a network of money laundering and influence peddling. When I confronted him, he threatened me, not just me, but you and our unborn child. Emily intervened, her voice charged with emotion. Is that why you left? To protect us? Jennifer nodded, tears running down her cheeks. Yes, honey, I left to keep us safe. But I made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. Alexander Wells. Jack stood up abruptly. Wells? What does he have to do with all this? Wells was your father's rival, Jack. I thought he could help me expose the truth, but he turned out to be just as corrupt as James. Blackmailed me for years, threatening to reveal my location to your father if I didn't cooperate. Sarah, who had been listening in silence, spoke for the first time. And Michael? How does he fit into all this? Jennifer looked at her sister with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Michael discovered the truth on his own. He contacted me, wanted to help. But Wells found out and, well, you know what happened. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with contained emotions and painful truths. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely a whisper. And Alexander Jr. Did he know? Jennifer shook her head. No, honey, Alexander Jr. didn't know anything about this. He really loved you. Jack, who had been processing all this information, approached Jennifer. Why now, Jennifer? Why did you decide to come now and tell all this? Jennifer looked him directly in the eyes. Because Wells no longer has power over me, thanks to you, Jack. And because it's time for our family to be united. It's time to heal. Jack looked around. At Emily, his daughter. At Sarah, who had been his unconditional support for years. And at Jennifer, the woman he never stopped loving. He felt a mixture of emotions. Pain for the lost years, anger for the lies, but also hope for the future. You're right, he finally said. It's time to heal, but it's also time to do justice. At that moment, as if fate wanted to test their newly formed family unity, Jack's phone rang. It was his head of security. Mr. Thompson, we have a problem. Laura Wells is on the news. She's threatening to reveal information about the twins. She says she has proof that they are legitimate heirs to the Wells fortune. Jack looked at his family, gathered for the first time after so many years of secrets and lies. It seems our battle isn't over yet, he said with determination, but this time we'll face it together. As the group prepared for this new challenge, Jack couldn't help but think about the unexpected turns his life had taken, from being a lonely magnate to becoming the patriarch of a complicated but united family. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. What Jack didn't know was that the biggest challenge was yet to come, a challenge that would test not only his business empire, but the very foundations of his newly discovered family. The days following Jennifer's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions and activity for the Thompson family. While they grappled with their own feelings and tried to rebuild long-broken bonds, they also had to face the external threat posed by Laura Wells. One morning, as they were having breakfast together, a new routine they were all learning to appreciate, Jack received an urgent call from his legal team. Mr. Thompson, said the voice on the other end of the line, Laura Wells has filed a formal lawsuit. She's claiming custody of the twins and a significant portion of Thompson Enterprises shares on behalf of Alexander Jr. Jack felt the world stop for a moment. He looked around, at Emily, who was playing with the twins, at Jennifer and Sarah, who were talking quietly, his family, his everything. "I understand," he finally responded. "Prepare everything. I won't let them take away what's ours." After hanging up, Jack gathered everyone in his study. He explained the situation, watching their faces change from surprise to fear and finally to determination. "I won't allow them to separate us," Emily said, protectively hugging Ethan and Noah. "These children are Thompsons, not Wells." Jennifer stepped forward, her face a mask of resolution. "Jack, I think it's time to use the information I've been keeping all these years. I have evidence of the Wells' illegal activities, including Laura's." "But that could be dangerous," Sarah intervened. "If we bring that to light, who knows how they might react?" Jack nodded, considering all the options. "You're right, Sarah. But maybe it's time to end this once and for all," Jack said, his voice loaded with determination. "No more secrets. No more threats in the shadows. It's time for the truth to come out." Emily approached her father, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'm with you, Dad. Let's do whatever it takes to protect our family." Jack looked at his daughter, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. He knew that what they were about to do could change everything, but he also knew there was no turning back. "All right," he finally said. "Jennifer, prepare all the information you have. Sarah, contact our legal and public relations team. Emily, I want you to take charge of the children's security. We don't know how the Wells will react when all this comes to light." As everyone sprang into action, Jack approached the window of his study. Outside, the sky was darkening, announcing a storm. It was a perfect reflection of what was to come. The following days were a frenzy of activity. The Thompson legal team worked day and night, preparing their defense against Laura Wells' lawsuit, while simultaneously organizing a counterattack based on the information provided by Jennifer one night. As they were reviewing the final details of their strategy, Sarah rushed into the study. "Jack, you need to see this," she said, turning on the television. On the screen appeared Laura Wells, her face a mask of false concern. "And that's why I'm forced to take these measures," she was saying. "The twins are part of the Wells family, and they deserve to know their true legacy. Jack Thompson has kept them away from their real family for too long." Jack turned off the television, his face a mixture of anger and determination. "That's enough," he said. "It's time to counterattack." The next day, Jack Thompson called a press conference. With his family by his side, he stood before a crowd of journalists and cameras. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "I'm here today to talk about the truth, a truth that has been hidden for far too long." For the next hour, Jack, with the help of Jennifer and his legal team, exposed the whole story. He spoke about James Thompson's illegal activities and how the Wells had continued those practices. He revealed how Jennifer had been threatened and forced into hiding, and how Michael had been murdered for trying to expose the truth. "The twins, Ethan and Noah, are my grandchildren," Jack said, his voice charged with emotion. "They are the product of love between my daughter Emily and Alexander Wells Jr., who was unaware of his family's illegal activities. These children are not a prize to be claimed. They are human beings who deserve to grow up in an environment of love and honesty." As Jack spoke, giant screens behind him displayed documents, photographs, and recordings that supported each of his claims. It was a complete and devastating exposure of the corruption that had plagued both families for decades. "Today, I'm not just fighting for my family," Jack continued. "I'm fighting for the truth, for justice, and for a future where our children can grow up without the weight of their parents' secrets and lies." The press conference caused a media earthquake. Within hours, social media exploded, news channels interrupted their regular programming, and Wells Enterprises stocks plummeted. That night, as the Thompson family gathered in the mansion, waiting for the repercussions of their bold move, they received an unexpected call. It was Alexander Wells Jr. "Jack," he said, his voice charged with emotion, "I just saw the conference. I had no idea about any of this." "I know, Alexander," Jack responded softly, "and I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult for you." There was a moment of silence before Alexander spoke again. "I want to see my children, Jack and Emily, if she'll allow it." Jack looked at Emily, who had been listening to the conversation. She nodded slowly. "I think that can be arranged, Alexander," Jack said. "It's time for all truths to come to light." As he hung up the phone, Jack felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He knew the hardest part was yet to come. Rebuilding trust, healing old wounds, and forging a new future for his newly expanded family wouldn't be easy. But as he looked around at Jennifer, Sarah, Emily, and the twins, Jack knew it was worth fighting for. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope, a hope born not from power or money, but from love and truth. What Jack didn't know was that this storm, though fierce, was only the prelude to a peace he had longed for all his life, a peace that was finally within his reach if he had the strength to hold on to it.